We've all heard about work slop, but do we understand really the implications of work slop on the organization? What can communicators do about this? We'll dive into that with some recent research in this short midweek episode of For Immediate Release. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 525 of For Immediate Release. I'm Shel Holtz.
And I'm Neville Hobson.
And Neville, it is great to have you back on the show. You're well enough to record again.
Yeah, it was certainly been an interesting few weeks, including the kind of disconnection that I did from just about literally everything with this heat exhaustion that I suffered, which was quite profound and far more serious than I thought, according to the doctor. And then the R&R, as I described it, the rest and recuperation, that slotted in nicely with our existing plans from the family here to spend some time in Novato, Marin County in California, which we did last week. And as some listeners will know, you and I and the family, in fact, we all met together, had lunch in a delightful restaurant in San Francisco last Thursday and took some pictures, which is what people saw. So I'm back in the UK now. It was a worthwhile visit. And well, here we are doing FIR again. It feels like deja vu all over again. It's great.
It is back to normal. I should tell people that if you're curious about the wonderful restaurant we ate at in San Francisco, it's called Water Bar, and my company, Webcore, built the building that it's in. So it was fun to have you there and to say, we built this.
Yeah, it was. I agree. The hospitality was really good in that restaurant. Very nice service, friendly people, excellent food, of course. It's focused on fish. So if you're a fish connoisseur, this is the place to go in San Francisco.
Yeah, and right on the water, you get a view of the Bay Bridge and
really nice.
Good part of the San Francisco Bay. So it was great to see you in person. It's been since 2019.
Yeah, a long time.
And here we are looking at each other over Riverside, but that's not the same.
No, the next best thing, but not the same.
Yeah, in real life really matters. But today's topic is one that we were planning to discuss just before you took ill. We're going to return to it.
We are. And this is based on an article that caught my eye a few weeks ago in the Harvard Business Review. It was actually published back in January, but having returned to it, I think it's even more relevant than it was then. The title of the article is Why People Create AI Work Slop and How to Stop It. Timely topic, I'd say. The authors use the term work slop to describe low-effort AI-generated work that looks polished on the surface, but ends up shifting the real work onto whoever receives it. We've probably all seen examples, reports full of generic language, presentations that say a great deal without saying very much, emails that are technically fine but leave you wondering what the sender actually thinks. Since that article appeared, the wider idea of AI slop has become much more prominent. We're hearing the term applied to the flood of cheap AI-generated material appearing on social networks, in publishing, marketing, and elsewhere. There's even research suggesting that people increasingly use AI slop as a judgment about authenticity. Something doesn't necessarily have to be AI-generated to be dismissed as slop. It just has to feel like it. Perhaps the most useful new evidence comes from research by the Society for Human Resource Management, the SHRM, the world's largest professional association dedicated to the practice of human resources management. Published in June, SHRM's Navigating AI in the Workplace 2026, based on more than 5,000 US workers, found that 41% use AI at work, and 44% of those users describe at least some of their output as AI slop. Early career employees feel the greatest pressure to adopt AI. SHRM also found greater engagement and commitment where organizations take an open approach to AI integration. What interested me most about the HBR article was his argument about why work slop happens inside organizations. The author suggests that it isn't fundamentally an AI problem at all. It's a leadership problem. Many organizations are telling employees simply to use AI without defining what success looks like, without giving people sufficient guidance or confidence, and without creating an environment where it's safe to experiment, ask questions, or admit uncertainty. In that environment, people can end up optimizing for appearing to use AI rather than actually using it well. Putting it simply, the article says it's the result of unclear AI mandates and overwhelmed teams. Leaders are issuing vague directives for employees to start using extremely powerful tools, while many of those employees are overburdened, psychologically depleted, and operating in environments where it doesn't feel safe to admit uncertainty or ask for help. Evidence published since the HBR article seems to reinforce rather than undermine that argument. We're seeing more research showing significant numbers of employees encountering poor quality AI-generated work, while at the same time employees are under increasing pressure to demonstrate that they're using AI. There's another dimension to this that I think is particularly interesting: productivity. Imagine that something which previously took me 2 hours to produce now takes me 20 minutes with AI. That's a significant productivity gain for me. But suppose I send it to Shel, to you, and he then spends an hour trying to understand what I mean, checking my claims and correcting some mistakes that I hadn't spotted. Have we actually improved productivity, or have I simply transferred the cost of my work to Shel? That's essentially what WorkSlop does. And some recent research into AI-assisted work describes this as a kind of tragedy of the commons. Individuals can appear more productive while imposing additional costs on everybody else. If an organization measures AI adoption, output volume, or individual efficiency rather than the performance of the whole system, WorkSlop might actually look like successful AI transformation. That struck a chord because it echoes something we've discussed on FIR more than once. Whenever we hear stories about AI failing in organizations, the technology itself often isn't the real issue. AI has a remarkable ability to expose weaknesses that were already there: unclear leadership, poor communication, lack of trust, unrealistic expectations, and organizations measuring activity rather than outcomes. And there's an important question of individual responsibility here too. Poor leadership may create the conditions for work slop, but that doesn't absolve the person who sends it. If I knowingly send something I haven't properly considered or checked simply because an AI produced it, that's also a failure of professional judgment. So perhaps work slop isn't really the diagnosis at all. Perhaps it's a symptom. Is AI creating a new workplace problem, or is it simply shining a very bright light on old management problems? What happens when leaders measure AI adoption instead of better decisions, better collaboration, and better business outcomes? And as AI makes producing apparently polished work almost effortless, does human judgment actually become more important rather than less? The Harvard Business Review article may now be 7 months old, but the questions it raises are becoming more urgent, not less. Shel?
Oh, without question. And there is newer research. And I found that there was work done by the AI Institute. They did a 2026, it was a research project. It's called the Work AI Index. And in addition to work slop, they have a new term in there called bot shitting. I kid you not. Bot shitting describes employees knowingly shipping AI output they believe is wrong. And 12% of employees who were surveyed for this research admit to doing this. And interestingly, when they are basically caught, they blame AI. They say, oh, the AI did this. 40% of workers blame the AI rather than themselves. There was also a study in January 26 from Workday. 3,200 leaders found that 37% of AI productivity gains are immediately lost to rework because the work slop isn't adequate. Employees spending an average of 6 hours a week correcting or rewriting flawed AI content. Built-in reported work slop now affects roughly 40% of employees and costs about $186 per month. And there was a more recent study, better upsourced this figure, that found that 66% of workers are spending 6+ hours every week fixing AI errors. So this is serious stuff. And by the way, nearly every recent report on work slop ties this to layoffs associated with AI. Workers or outlets are connecting 2026 tech job cuts to premature AI-driven headcount reduction. And the workers who are left behind are absorbing that work slop rework burden so that we cut people to use AI. Now the survivors are cleaning up after it is an important framing to look at. And one last thing I'll mention from some research, this was just from June of this year. They found that the errors in work slop go beyond the work that somebody else needs to do to correct it. It moves downstream through teams and into the organization's collective knowledge base. And that knowledge base just deteriorates. So it's not just individual wasted hours, but it's this slow erosion of what the organization actually knows to be true. So this is a very serious problem. And I don't see a lot being said about measures that organizations are taking to address it. And I think some measures need to be taken pretty soon, or this is going to get out of control.
Yeah, Harvard Business Review article does have some suggestions of what organizations can do to address it, which I'll mention in a minute. But they also include some examples. I found these rather interesting. Not a whole lot, 3 only. But nevertheless, they talk about the toxic effect on workplace dynamics work slop can have, breeding mistrust and leading team members to think less of the sender's intelligence and trustworthiness, among other traits. They talk about their ongoing research, where they've heard a number of examples of work slop seeding ill will, eroding trust, and generally having a corrosive effect on workplace morals. There's one I thought, I can imagine this. One example they give, where one employee at a technology company told the Harvard Business Review that he'd noticed the tone in their performance review was unlike their manager, and that the document recycled content from their self-evaluation. The experience made them feel unvalued and underappreciated, and they gave up all hope they would ever be promoted. So reading between the lines, what happened? That whoever did that grabbed some of the self-evaluation of the employee, had an AI produce it. I bet that's what happened there. So we don't know the details behind that, but that's a really good example of what you could see happening in an environment where there is lack of clarity. All those things we've discussed that the Harvard Business Review points out, and the pressure to deliver in some form or another. So, for instance, doing an evaluation, employee evaluation would come into that area where the manager has cut corners and used AI to do it. And that I can imagine is happening a lot. And in relation to the examples that the Harvard Business Review piece includes, they say something quite interesting I found about they talk about many of the responses focused on the productivity costs, the time people wasted dealing with each instance of work slop that crossed their desks. But they note what should really worry leaders is the impact work slop can have on human relationships. And I think that's a point to hammer home. It's a kind of a soft thing. You don't kind of see it, but it does. And some of these examples make that very clear indeed. So that's a kind of a manifestation of the management failure behind all of this, Shel, don't you think?
I do. And I think it's because we've been rushing headlong into this rather than pausing to strategize it. And I think we've talked about that deterioration of human relationships once before. The situation is that people are not picking up the phone or sending an email off to the local subject matter expert because Claude has the answer, ChatGPT has the answer. So you're getting less of that interaction within the organization. This is causing people to assume some of the work that is outside their area of expertise, outside their lane, if you will. And instead of reaching out to the people in the organization who actually have that expertise so they can do that work that previously was part of their job. Another interesting thing that you noted was pointing out that somebody felt that this was leading to a lack of promotion. opportunity. I'm reading a book right now, an excellent book. We were talking about it before we started recording. It's called Robot Proof. And one of the things she talks about is this economic phenomenon of deprofessionalization, where the AI takes on a certain amount of the work, and therefore you as the professional don't need to know or do as much as you did before. And it lowers your overall value. It pushes the wage down for people who are doing that. She uses, the author, Vivian Ming, I think is her name, uses an analogy of Jiffy Lube, which in the U.S. is a place where people take their cars to have their oil changed. And she says, what if colonoscopies worked that way? You don't need a doctor to do a lot of this work, because a lot of the work in a colonoscopy is pretty routine, and the AI can do that. Now you need just the Jiffy Lube guy there to take the hose and do the insertion, looking at the camera to make sure it's right. But that's more of a technical skill than a deep medical skill that is taught in medical school and then honed over years of experience and practice. And this is the road I think we're headed down if we don't take some steps to fix it. The people who were brought into an organization based on education and years of experience and subject matter expertise and perhaps even thought leadership no longer need all that stuff. They just need to do the base level effort that is required by a human following the instructions of the AI. So I think organizations need to look at this very seriously about how this work gets done, what is required of the outputs, and have guardrails in place to make sure that people aren't skirting around it. Because let's face it, if the cost of producing this stuff continues to drop, there's an incentive on the part of the organization to go ahead and use this because the cost is lowered. It's hard to see the impact of that on sales and reputation in the short term. In the long term, I think it absolutely will have that impact.
Yeah, I'd say you're right. I mean, one thing that I've been talking about all year in everything I've written or said about artificial intelligence in organizations is it's about the people, not the technology. If you're implementing AI or doing a rollout or planning it or telling people use AI, as a leader, you have the responsibility to make that as crystal clear as possible and focus on the people. So one of the things I did like about the Harvard piece was the concluding remarks they make, starting with this: the greatest irony of all is to make AI work at work. We need to get better at being human. Absolutely spot on. Leaders need to make space for the unpolished, slower but more rewarding work of human collaboration. Without organizational changes that enable agency and trust rather than the AI mandates for overburdened teams, we'll all drown in the sludge of work slop. Very well put concluding statement, I think. But I think the serious element of that is something that, in my opinion, I'm amazed that leaders don't seem to get it at all. They talk about efficiencies, they talk about cost savings, they talk about all these things, and yet there's nothing about how do we help employees become more productive themselves, that develop themselves too. How do we help them, in a sense, augment their skills using AI? Now, that's not to say, and I'm not suggesting for a second, that AI leaders, generally speaking, just don't think about that at all. I believe they do, but it's way down the priority list in terms of how they communicate this. They need to get that to the top of the priority list. But more than just talk about it, they need to put in place all these things. And there are many things they can do, but there's, in a sense, rebuilding trust with people. We've talked about examples in recent episodes of layoffs that are very clear to see. As people are talking about them all the time, and that is happening. We talked about a really great one a few episodes back about what Ford Motor Company is doing with the greybeards. Lovely name. We'll pass on the age thing on that, but the organizational collective memory people have of how things are done and what worked in the past amongst people who were laid off and they're gone. So they rehired a whole bunch, and they've benefited hugely, as the articles we cited go into some detail, including, I believe, if I recall, Shel, they won not an award, but they were like the number one automaker for a particular reason that they attribute directly to rehiring all these graybeards. So that is a great way of doing it. But it's just one example. There are undoubtedly more fundamental things organizationally people can do to kind of rebuild this connection between the organization and the people who make up that organization, the employees mostly. So there's a lot of work to be done. And yet none of this is rocket science to leaders at all. I don't believe, just because we've got this newfangled technology on the scene that, you're telling people to start using it without giving them the proper guidance. So these to me are leadership 101 things. And if no one's doing this, then communicators, let's step up to the plate and help them. That's what I think we should be doing.
Absolutely. And I have been reading more and more research that talks about what happens when you delegate your thinking to AI. And rather than doing the research yourself and the writing yourself, which helps you think through the issue, it actually has an impact on your ability to think and to learn. So there are a lot of reasons I think that we need to take this seriously. I think the first thing communicators need to do inside their organizations is raise the alarm.
Yeah.
Because I think this may be an issue that everybody's heard slop and everybody's heard work slop, but I don't know that everybody in the organization, especially the decision makers, are up to speed on what the research is saying about all of this and the deleterious impact it can have on our organizations and the outputs that we produce. So I think sharing this data, and we will have links to the research in the show notes. I think sharing this data and making people who make the decisions aware of what this could mean to the future reputation and earnings of the organization is the place to start.
Yeah, I agree. So, well, I was going to say, just simply good tips in this discussion. The links to the articles, please read them. They're really, really useful. You'll find a lot of insights into all the ones that we'll have in the show notes. So there you've got your route map, I would say.
And that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.